Hey, you're with TheEZGZ. This video is going to be about Weber IDF carburetors, and is it possible to take a pair of carburetors that was designed to run port on port and use one of those carburetors in a single center mount setup like this? I'm going to tell you right off, because I know there's people that want to do this and have this. This is a 40 IDF Weber carburetor, has 28mm Venturis, Volkswagen engine that's been bored and stroked to make it an 1800. It has a very mild cam. It's an FK7, but I'm using 1:1 ratio rockers. FK7 Engel cam. What I have arrived at here is 55 idle jets, F11 emulsion tubes, I believe it's 160 or 180 air correction jets, a 135 main jet. Of course, everything's going to be in pairs. Your idle jets are accessible on the back of this screw. Be sure and don't lose the O-ring. I've got my fuel air mixture screw. It's not air, it's fuel. The needle valve for my idle fuel adjustment is 1 1/4 turns. The idle speed screw, or what people think is the idle speed screw, is less than 1/2 turned. You want to back that screw out until there's a space. The butterflies are completely closed. When you make contact with that, you never ever want to turn it more than 1/2 turn in. If it won't idle and it coughs and sputters, don't turn the screw in to get it the idle speed to settle down. Because if you do that, it will idle fine, but as soon as you engage the car and try driving it, and you start off like from a stop sign, it's going to sputter and fall on its face. It'll be fine when it's sitting here. You can rev it and do things with it, but it's going to stutter. What you've got to do, what I ended up doing, is drilling a hole, and you can see it down there, a little black dot, and start off, there's one on each side, in the plate, in the throttle plate, and start off with maybe a 3/32. Don't go any bigger than that. You want to make one hole, and you want to test it and see if it improves it and how much. Once you go too much, your idle speed will be increased, so even if you back that idle adjustment screw off, have the throttle plates completely closed, your idle is going to be too fast. Now, where did I get this idea? I took all of my information painstakingly from the Weber carburetor book. I looked at the design of the Volkswagen Solex carburetor. What do you see there in the butterfly? You see a hole in that butterfly, but that hole is huge because it's feeding 4 cylinders at an idle. This other hole that you see here in the side, when you're adjusting your carburetor, this is the big one is the air screw. It goes to that big passage. The small one is the idle screw. This one is that where the solenoid goes in to shut everything completely down when you turn off the key, so that it doesn't diesel and continue to run. Okay, so that's how these design works for these carburetors. Here is a product sheet from Redline. Redline is the United States importer for Weber carburetors. You can buy Weber carburetors in a lot of places from wholesalers, but they get them from Redline. Redline does sell some parts, and you can also get them from different wholesalers. HPMX and Weber parts seem to interchange. Right here, with the throttle plate closed, you're supposed to be covering up the progression ports. And this is, it gets air around the outside of the throttle plate. They don't completely close. This is a 44 IDF carburetor that came on that center mount manifold, it would not work on that small engine. If you look here closely, you can see the 4 holes down there below the brass port. That's where the needle valve comes in, and that's what meters in the idle fuel. When you open the plate, you're uncovering those progression ports and you're getting extra fuel from the idle circuit. Usually if you have that bog, you need a little bit more fuel. I've heard of people going as big as 60 idle jets and possibly even bigger than that. This carburetor does not work well on a small engine. The bigger the engine, the better that center mount carburetor is going to work. We're going to do a cold start up here shortly. All of this is temporary. I've added a spring here because the spring that's on the side is not strong enough to bring it back all the way. So I'm just trying to experiment with a few things. I may have to make a bracket. Many of these intake manifolds are held in place with a center, a flange, and this case bolt here. Mine did not have that on it. I made a tab, attached it, a piece of aluminum, and I've run it underneath the generator strap to keep this thing solid. Okay? These stacks that you see sticking up here, that's where your emulsion tube and your main fuel jet and your air correction jet go. Let's see if I've got one sitting here. Okay, this is your jet stack. Okay, this is the holder. This is your air correction jet. This is your emulsion tube, and your main jet goes in the end of that. Okay, you can use drills to drill out the jets. Better be careful. Once you've drilled it out, you ain't going back. Some people say, oh, you can solder the hole shut and re-drill it. Bullshit. It doesn't work as easy as that. I've tried it. I've pulled all this information out. They also make another device for a center mount setup that you might want, and that is a what is it called? They call it the bypass screw. It's a check valve that goes on the bottom of the float, and it keeps when you operate your throttle and the accelerator pump squirts. If you go real easy, real slow, it won't squirt. The fuel goes back into the float bowl. That little bypass valve bypasses that feature and allows it to squirt right away. The biggest problem that you have when you're center mounting versus having 2 carburetors, now you've got a hot, short manifold and that fuel stays vaporized. Those things work great, but I am sick and tired of messing with the linkage. I don't want my carburetors down close to the tire. I don't want to be fighting. These idle jets frequently get clogged up, and you have sheet metal in the way. You can make holes, plates, everything else. It's a pain in the neck. It's hard to keep them synchronized, especially if you're off-roading. Another point I'd like to make, personal opinions here. When you do get this all set up and running right, you want it to stay clean. That's not an off-road air cleaner. That's a cotton K&N style oiled filter, but to me, that thing is for keeping peach pits and avocado seeds out of your carburetor. It's not going to keep dust and dirt out. If you oil it a lot, it's going to clog up. If you don't oil it enough, you're going to get dust through it and it's going to wear your engine, and you're also going to have problems with your jets getting clogged up and running crummy in the middle of the run. That's no fun. Racers use these all the time, but they use different air cleaners, and they're not idling in traffic for long periods of time. They're racing. They're going fast most of the time. It's not hard to make one of these carburetors allow your engine to idle. And it's not hard to set it up where it runs at full throttle. Where the difficulty comes in is everything in between. These are air bypass screws. I thought maybe instead of using that hole in the plate, I'd use that. It worked fine as an idle, but the drivability was not there, and the book says to keep those closed. The needle valve, 1 1/4 turns. If you're more than 1 1/2 turns open, you probably need a bigger idle jet, which is up here. Now this manifold has a crossover hole in the intake manifold. It's gonna, if you have a 110 cam, for instance, which is real popular, you're gonna have this roughness. It's not gonna idle. You're gonna hear this rough idle. To some people that might sound cool. I'm getting used to it. I have to retrain my foot to operate this thing. If you slam it open real hard, real fast, the air is going to go in and it's going to leave the fuel behind, and you're going to get a stumble. It'll catch and take off, but it's real aggravating. Be sure that when you're let off the gas pedal, it comes all the way back to the idle stops. Do not add springs over here. Add the springs down here so the tension is here. Don't want to wear out or bend your shaft. When you are at full throttle, make sure that it's full throttle. The flat plates on the shaft are straight up and down, and your stop is on the stop. Here's your full throttle stop. The other side is your idle stop. This is a right-hand carburetor. For decades, they have not made left-hand carburetors. Just the way it is. This little piece sticking out here is a vacuum port for a distributor, if you should so want one. Don't have your fuel pressure set too high. 1 or 2 pounds works for me. Everything I've said, your results can differ, and they may different. I'm not here to solve your problem. All I'm doing is showing you how I solved my problem. It was running good yesterday. I expect it to run poorly until it warms up. We're going to give it some throttle here. That was 4,000 RPM shift. I did take it down the interstate. It'll run at 75, 80 miles an hour, and it feels like my foot is barely barely pushing on the throttle. There's plenty of throttle left. It doesn't perform as well as 2 carburetors, but it does still, there's not a restriction that you're going to notice. You're still going to be able to do whatever you were doing. You need to make sure before you start doing all this that your car engine is tuned up, your ignition system is spot on, everything is good. I still got a little lean spot right in those progression ports. Don't think the engine's not even 2 miles, so it's not really warmed up. Volkswagen engines are a little cold-blooded just by their nature. Cornering okay. It's not a rocket ship. It doesn't accelerate as fast as it does with duals. I don't want that, especially if I'm going up here in the mountains to my fishing holes where the roads are washed out and rough. I don't want something that's going to be jerking around and flooding out and having spasms. I want something that's going to be a little bit mushy, a little bit slower, slow and steady. I want a smoother ride for myself and my car going over the rocks. These center mount carburetors tend to work a little bit better in the rough because of the location of the carburetor. It's not being jostled as much from side to side. When you go through water holes and just the general dust, you're a little further away from the rear tire. Alright. Not hammer it, but I'm just taking a normal corner. tell the difference between coming back through the carburetor and the exhaust. The exhaust really needs to be pretty tight. It's running pretty smooth. The more it warms up, we're about 3 miles now, the better it runs. So all of this has clarified some things, given you an idea of what to experiment with on yours. There's no one fit all setup. Every engine and combination and location's going to be different. Okay, now here we're at 1100 RPM. We're going up a hill in 3rd gear. I haven't downshifted. It's accelerating slow and smooth. I don't have it floored. I'm trying to get a demonstration of how it can pull smoothly. I'm pretty pleased. So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. TheEZGZ out.